Well, good morning, guys. Here I am again. B&D and Annalie and Samantha too. I thought I'd share some stuff with you today, so hang on. Here we go. I have been asked some questions lately about myself, personal questions, and this video may be a little different. You may want to turn it off, I don't know, and that's okay. These things aren't mandatory, and you can do as you please. But I thought I'd take a little time and tell you about myself. I'm 77. I have a good retirement. I have a worldwide Bible study and ministry that I've been going for some time. Right now we're about to finish the Bible. We're in the book of Revelation. I publish that once or twice a week. I have published about 16 books, have been writing for many years. I speak at churches and schools and talk to children about writing and talk to adults about Christianity, and I am a Christian. That's first and foremost. It's Christian, God, my family, and my responsibilities. That's the way I live my life. My life has been quite interesting, actually. I was born in 1938, and I remember a lot of things. I remember the milk freezing out the top of the bottle and popping the cap off. I remember seeing and following, chasing mule-drawn wagons where a man would throw a leather cover over his shoulder and grab a 50-pound block of ice and take it into a refrigerator or an ice box. My mother had one of those. I remember riding the old steamers across the continental United States to California as a youngster. Did that many times. That thing would belch black coal smoke and blow steam, and I can still remember the sound of that whistle as she'd come into a town or a station to pick up passengers or let off passengers. I remember all of those things. I remember my dear mother, who was 5'10", 4'10", having wooden blocks put on the accelerator and the brake pedal and the clutch pedal, and how she never allowed anyone to beat her across an intersection. An interesting story, she always drove Studebaker convertibles. And her and I were going across country one time to San Diego to see my father when his ship came in. He was in the Navy for many years. World War II in Korea, very highly decorated man. He was commissioned by the Secretary of the Navy to take bodies back after the war and preside over funerals. But I remember driving across country in that Studebaker convertible, and we were in New Mexico somewhere on Route 66, and a sudden snowstorm came up, and Mom couldn't see where she was going, so she pulled over to the side of the road. And we sat there for a while, and a big old auto hauler pulled up and stopped, and a man got out and came over and knocked on the window. And Mother rolled the window down, and he said, "Are you in trouble, ma'am?" And she said, "I just can't see the road." He said, "Well, there's a little town up ahead," and he said, "I'm going to pull up and start out." And he said, "You keep my taillights in sight." But he said, "Don't get too close, or you and that boy there will end up in heaven somewhere." So Mom said, okay, and she looked at him and said, "You're an angel." And he said, "No, ma'am, I'm just a truck driver." So we went on into town, and Mother paid about $2 for a motel, and that's another story. She never rented a motel room unless she could see it first, and it had to have a radio. Anyway, she told that man, "You're an angel." He said, "No, ma'am, I'm just a truck driver." And the dedication in one of my children's books called Angry Angel is a dedication to the truck drivers. Until the day my mother died, she believed that all truck drivers were angels. Just a little story of my mother and one of my experiences. But you know, as time went on, I grew up in a little town called Chula Vista, California, for the most part, and Crawfordsville, Indiana, for the other part. But as time went on, when I was about, 16, I found myself standing on a street corner in Chula Vista, California, watching my parents and my little brother drive away. And I was just standing there. Well, when that happens, you learn real quick who you are. You learn to grow up. And that's what I did. I went to work in a Shell filling station for a gentleman by the name of Charlie Booker in Chula Vista, California, for $1 an hour, changing tires, pumping gas, wearing that old Shell uniform with the bill cap on it like the policemen wear. And I worked 90 hours a week. And next to that filling station was a vacant lot. There was an old car on that vacant lot, and I lived in the back of it. And I took baths in the filling station restroom and washed my privates in the filling station restroom. I only had one set. And when I get real hungry and wouldn't have any money, I'm ashamed to say that the grocery store that was 2 blocks down the street, I would occasionally snitch an apple. But you know, the grocery store manager knew that. He knew me. He traded where I worked. And he never said anything. Now, I didn't have a trouble with alcohol or marijuana or anything else, but I had dropped out of school. I didn't finish the 10th grade. And I was a ball player and an athlete. But you know, I never considered myself to be a loser or to be stupid. I never lost confidence in who I was. And in the back of that old car, one night, in tears, I think, if I remember correctly, I found God. Of course, he always knew where I was, and from that time to this time, he's never left my side. But time went on, and shortly after I'd been at that filling station for, I guess, a year, I joined the U.S. Coast Guard. And in going to the Coast Guard meetings, I moved back to Indiana. My father called and said, "Come home." So I came home. And I couldn't attend the meetings anymore, so I joined the Army. And took my basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and shipped out to Europe. And as a result of those 2 services, I have an honorable discharge from the U.S. Coast Guard and one from the U.S. Army, of which I'm very proud. But in the Army, I found that I really couldn't read and write too well. It's something that I just didn't pay attention to, like most kids. And so I determined to improve myself. And the first book that I bought to read was a Louis L'Amour Western. It had 198 pages in it. But I couldn't understand all the words, and so I went and got a dictionary, a Webster's dictionary, and about every other word, or every fifth word, or any word that I didn't understand, I would look up. So that's how I taught myself to read. And it wasn't long before I could read 3 or 4 books at a time and know where I was in every single one of them. And I became hungry for knowledge, for learning. And I read constantly. And my writing skills began to improve because about that time, or a little before that time, I had begun to write. The first thing I ever wrote was a poem to my mother. And to this day, I condemn myself for not saving it. I think she had it, but it's been lost somewhere, as I believe. And I got out of the service and went back to Indiana and got a job. And I met this young girl. And at that time, I was working for Sears in Indianapolis. We got married. And had 2 kids, Lisa and David. And I suddenly decided that I wanted to move back to the West Coast, which is what I did. And I transferred to Sears out there, and we had another child, Hannah Lee. And that was a good time in my life. But time went on, and we moved back to Indianapolis. And my wife became ill. We had purchased a home and had started a couple of businesses. I had a construction business. I had worked for the post office in California and transferred back to the post office in Indiana. But I had started a construction business, and she'd started a dog grooming business. Now this was in about 1972 or 1973. And together in 1972 and 1973, we had a nice little home and a car and a pickup truck for my business. I had all of my tools, and she had a prosperous business. And she became ill with cancer. She was 31. And she had surgery. A massive surgery, and in 1972 or 73 they were still in the dark ages with cancer, and I'm not sure that they're not still in the dark ages today, because I lost my daughter to cancer years later. But she came home from the hospital, and by the time she came home from the hospital, I had been taking care of the children, and I had lost my construction business and my tools, and her grooming business was gone. And before she went to the hospital, together we were making about $1,000 a week, which was good money in 1972. But she came home to the hospital to an army cot and a black and white TV. As I say, we had 3 children. I had no business, no income. I had $19. And I ran an ad in the paper. Windows and gutters cleaned. And I prayed about it. And a phone rang off the wall. And so I was able to start again. Shortly thereafter, I took a job with Pinkerton as a night watchman in a warehouse at $2.50 an hour. It wasn't much, but it was paying the bills. And for 8 years, I nursed my wife. She died when she was 39 of colon cancer. But during that time, I took a job with the Indiana Department of Correction as security as in a prison. And I also began to study. I continued to study. I've studied all my life. Because I've never doubted who I was, or I've never doubted the opportunity available to me if I had something to offer. And so I was hired by General Motors as a silversmith. And while I was at General Motors, I noticed that they were having thefts in silver, and so I wrote an article about it and sent it to their head of security, and before I knew it, I was working for security in General Motors with a secret classification, and I worked there for 15 years and retired at the age of 53 with a pension and insurance, which was later canceled by General Motors. But I still draw the pension. After I retired from General Motors, I believe that was in '92, I went to work for the Catholic Church in Plainfield, Indiana. As a matter of fact, my wife went to work at the Catholic Church with me. She worked all one summer for nothing before they hired her, actually. And we took care of the school and the church. And we were there for 12 years. And during that time, I had, on different occasions, parishioners and even priests come to me and ask me to pray with them. And I could never figure out why. I just did not know, but I gladly did. It was an honor. And also during that time, I would have people in my own family and people that were not in my family call me to their bedside, their deathbed, and to pray with them. And again, I never knew why. I've never considered myself that worthy, but it was an honor. And so that's pretty much been my life over the years. Never been terribly successful. Always been motivated and always cared for people. So I'll go on here, but I thought I'd share that a little bit with you because many people don't really understand Catholics, and I can tell you, they're wonderful, wonderful people. We came to know them in 12 years, and we loved them, and they loved us. And that's another thing. People talk about the rosary. My opinion of the rosary, and I know it by heart, you're not asking Mother Mary to pray for you, or you're not praying to Mother Mary. You're asking Mother Mary to pray for you at the time of your death. She's not an idol. It's just like I would turn to my son, Jason, and say, "Son, pray for me at the hour of my death." That's exactly what it is. There's a little more to it than that, but that's pretty much what it is. But I'll go on with the rest of my story. But throughout my life, I've always reached out to better myself. I've always noticed that people are constantly in need of help. And to help them is something that gives you great pleasure. At least it does me. During the time that I was in General Motors, I began to write books. Christian children's books. My first novel was called Nancy Crispin Williver, Indiana Woman, which was a historical Western romance. very accurately portrayed historically. And the second book I wrote, novel, some years later, which actually is part of a trilogy, is called Copper Penny. Again, a historical Western romance. Now, in the meantime, I wrote several children's books, Christian books. I've always believed that children are much smarter than people give them credit for. I know for a fact that they can follow a storyline, and I've never been really interested or the least bit motivated to make what they call flip books or picture books. Children are very perceptive. And so my children's stories always run from at least 600 to as much as 2,500 words. And almost every children's story that I write is about a challenged child. And the reason for that is many of the children that I knew while I was growing up had polio. And they had to overcome polio every single day. And so the books that I write about challenged children are set so that the children must overcome adversity, must learn to be the heroes and the heroines of their own lives. And there's always a Christian message in there the way I write it, because they're uplifting. They let the children know that they're important. And if you ever want to feel love, really, really feel love, you have a challenged child give you a hug. If it doesn't bring tears to your eyes and joy to your heart, I will be very much surprised. So that's been my writing over the years, and I have a worldwide Bible study, as I told you before. And I've written Bible books. Almost every book in the Bible, or many of them, I have written books about. Some are paperback, some are what they call e-books. And when we finish Revelation, I will publish that in a paperback, and I will eventually, God willing, publish the entire New Testament in a paperback with my comments and commentary. Now, I'm being a common man. I'm not a scholar by any means, as I told you about my education. Nevertheless, years of study have provided me with a certain amount of knowledge of Scripture, which I can tell you runs much deeper than the words that you read on the page. So, time went on, and I buried my wife, and in a couple of years married the beautiful woman that I have now, Donna, who's been my wife for 35 years. But during that time, my youngest daughter came to me one day and she said, "Pop, I have cancer. I have the same cancer that Mom had." Well, my heart just sank, because I've buried a mother, father, sister, brother, and wife and daughter. And she said, "But I'll beat it, Pop." And so I supported her through that, and she was ill for 5 years. She came to me one day and she said, "Dad, I was taking a shower this morning and I felt hands on my head, and I heard, 'You are loved.'" And from that point on, there was no fear in her. She was a Christian, very intelligent woman. Became a bank executive in just a few years. And she passed. And I mourned her terribly. Terribly. You're not supposed to outlive your children. And I was mowing the yard one day. I was using my riding mower, a snapper. And I had just finished the orchard, and I was coming up the hill and was mowing, and I heard pop. And I turned and there was no one there, and I heard it again, pop. So I turned the mower off. And I said, "Is that you, Anna?" And she said, "Don't worry anymore, Pop. I'm okay." And so I was able to heal from that. And so I can tell you from her experience and the experience that my wife related to me before she died, that there's a heaven. My wife, before she died, called me to her bedside, and she said, "I have something to tell you." She said, "You've been a good husband." But she said, "I kneeled before him and he put his hands on my head and gave me a new name." Now, my wife had been sick for 8 years. And I said, "What name did he give you?" And she said, "I can't tell you. I was told not to say anything." And a few hours later, she was gone. But she told me what heaven looked like. She told me of the colors, of the relatives that she saw, and on and on. Now I'm going to stop this for a few minutes and take care of some responsibilities, but I'll be back with you because we have more to talk about. I hope you're enjoying this. I know it's out of the norm, but I've been asked so many questions about my personal life and about my writing and about my Bible ministry that I thought perhaps that I would just share that with you today. Okay guys, I'm back. I'm not going to carry this out for too much longer. I just wanted to tell you a couple more things. After my wife and Donna and I had been married a couple, 3 years, we had a son named Jason. And he's the one with the brains in the family. Very artistic, very articulate, very stubborn. But, you know, out of all the children I've had, Lisa, David, Anna, Beth Ann, who lives in Indiana and has her own farm, and Jason, I've never regretted a minute of it. It's expensive to raise children, of course, as you know, but that's what we're for. That's what we need to do, is take care of our families. But time went on, and during the last 35 years I've written many books, most of which are available on Amazon.com under my name, Bernard Albertson, or Barnes & Noble. But just because you write books doesn't mean that you're going to be rich. An old man told me many, many years ago, writers write because that's what they do. A writer is compelled to write. And so we do. Those that become wealthy are selected by publishers that do a lot of advertising. It's all about money. But I find that writing Christian things, Bible books and children's Christian books, aren't going to make you rich. Nobody's dying in them. They are in the Bible books because, as you know, the Old Testament is so full of violence, and the New Testament is full of violence, that if people would take time to read it, they would think, this is much more interesting than what I've just been reading. But that's not the case. Nevertheless, over these many years, I have published many books. I've kind of slowed down in the last 2 or 3 years because my main interest is in my ministry, my worldwide ministry. We have, probably 600 or 700 people a week that join for Bible study. And I put a video on that site occasionally. That would be Bible study with Bernard Albertson, or bernardalbertson.com. You're welcome to join that if you like. But I've had a good life. It's been a struggle. Been very hard. A lot of heartache. A lot of tears. But I never lost sight of who I was. I always knew that I could climb the ladder. And that seems to be what I miss most about some of the young folks that we have today. Anything worth having is worth earning. That's always been my philosophy. But as I say, I started watching an iceman pull ice off of a mule-drawn wagon. Saw the first jet airplane. I've seen old men rub molds and remove them from hands. That happened to my sister. I pushed a heavy old iron lawnmower. So I've done many things that through the years would surprise many people. Some of the best times of my life were when the cars in the 30s, 40s, and 50s had their own what I call personalities. Beautiful things. Before everything went so modern. Children anymore, I doubt if very few of them have ever hoed a garden, or detasseled corn, or dug a ditch. One of the first jobs that I had when I was 12 years old, outside of carrying newspapers, was shoveling sand for a cement mixer to lay the sidewalks in a town. That was when I was 12. So life is full of ups and downs, but I have a saying: life is sweet, bumps and all. Well, I love you guys. Listen, if you like our videos, subscribe. If you want to leave a message, leave a message. I can't get to them all, but I try to do the best I can. I'm a healthy old man, cantankerous old fart, and I love you guys. I'll see you.